This tutorial is regarding using the Move tool and the Line tool to reshape the geometry in your model quite easily. I'm going to start by showing you how to use the Move tool as a stretch. I've gotten this question many times in my classes, so what we're going to do is draw a simple rectangle here. I'm going to intentionally leave this line short of where I typically would like it to be. The result of this is you are going to get a little endpoint right here, which leaves more geometry than we really need. So, how to use the Move tool to stretch one of these lines. So I'm going to eliminate one line. And you'll see as soon as I do, that eliminates the face as well. So I'd like this point to be over there. So using the Move tool, without selecting this line, do not pre-select anything. Pick that point and run it out to that point. So now we have a single line in this case. As you can see, I can't pick any kind of face. So to recreate that face here, using the Line tool again, the face is back. And I have a single line here, which eliminates some extraneous geometry. Further, using the Move tool, if I pick this line and then say I want to shorten this or stretch this back, I'll use the Move tool again and staying on axes. And you see if I press and hold the Shift key, it also stays on axes. To stay on axes on the green direction, I can also press the left arrow key and it will keep it on axes there. So the point being, I can reshape this rectangle using the Move tool quite easily. Now, I'd like to push-pull this up and get a shape. So I'm going to do that real quick. Now, if I want to use the Line tool to create a new shape coming out of here, I simply will draw on this face. Make sure it says on face. Stay on axes. And it'll pick up that inference. So now I have that shape and I have this shape. So I've now cut this face into two faces. Similar to what I just did with the rectangle in the beginning of this tutorial, I can move or stretch this face. Again, if I hold Shift, you'll see that big old fat line show up, so it keeps me on axes. If I don't, if I'm, practiced at this, I can do this easily by not doing any of that, just pulling those. I'm going to also move this line. So now I've recreated that shape. Now I have two faces. If I want to push-pull this, you'll see they are separate. And I can put it back by referencing that other face. And I can push-pull this one as well. So I'm going to leave that one there, like so. Now, lines, in this case 4, will create this face. So I need all 4 of these lines to create that face. On the other side of that coin, if I erase one of these, I lose the face. You'll notice that the face back in here, the one that was part of this, is also now gone. So if I want to put that back, I just duplicate a line and recreates that face. Now here's a fun one. This line I just put in to fix this face. I can erase that. And that face now is whole. Interesting. I've always found that interesting. I'm going to put that back. To recreate this face and this face, draw one line at their intersection and I get the face back. I can now erase that line, I lose that face. So erasing lines that should be edges, in this case, eliminate the faces. To get them back, you just draw the lines back in. And we get the faces back. So that's one use of the move tool. I can stretch faces. I can also use the move tool here if I want, much like a push-pull. Just moving that face in some direction will allow me to pull that out. Now you say, okay, that's the same as the push-pull too, and that's true. I'd like to recreate the geometry here in this section. I'd like to get something a little more interesting, so I'm going to just erase that whole thing. You notice I just picked on that point right here, the intersection of all these lines, and I get all of them at one time. Convenient. I'm going to recreate the geometry here simply by drawing lines. Okay, so now I have different geometry in here. If I erase that line, that geometry goes away. Similarly, if I draw these edges, I will get different faces, as so. Okay. Now, if I'd like to change this geometry, I can pick a single point. Don't pre-select anything here. Just use the move tool and pre-select, select that point and move that geometry. So what's happening is it's stretching all these faces because they're stuck together. That's how SketchUp works. Everything's stuck together. All right. So now, let's say that I'd like to recreate this geometry again. And at this point, I'm going to pick these two lines, these 2 points, and this point. So now I have folds. I have 2 faces and I have a fold. So triangles will also create geometry. The interesting part about this is I can, by moving 1 point, allow this whole thing to change. And I can move it to a specific point if I like. Well, that one's not going to do anything. Okay. Now, like the last time, I can erase those lines, and oddly enough, that face is all joined together. I guess that makes sense. Now, if I'd like to draw a item, say on this surface, let's say I want to draw another triangle or a rectangle or whatever. I'm going to draw a line, and I'd like it to be parallel to that edge. So I'm going to start here. Make sure it says on face. I'm going to pick this line. You see here, I actually automatically, parallel, it turns pink. If it doesn't, you can just kind of reference that edge, and you'll get a pink line indicating it's parallel. Same thing happens here, and in this case, it references the first point. Using push-pull, I can pull this out. Now you'll notice that a shape pulled out of a diagonal face will come out perpendicular. Push-pull is always perpendicular to the face you've chosen. You can't push-pull anything at a diagonal unless you have this. It still will be perpendicular to that face. Now, again, I can recreate geometry here using lines, so I'm going to erase these just to show you that we can recreate this geometry pretty easily. Or not recreate it, but make new. I'm going to create new faces here. And you can see as I draw these lines, new faces get created. And I end up with completely different geometry. Now that point there would be nice if it were touching this. I'm going to use the tape measure tool and just create a little guideline here. So I have a point there. I'm going to move this face. Let's see, I want to go in the red direction. So I'm going to press the right arrow key to maintain red, or I can use the shift key as well, holding it down. Okay, so now I've created that face running directly onto that. I can do a similar situation with this one. Hold the red arrow key or tap it. And you can see as I go along, I'm creating different geometry. That's simply using the move tool. This one here, I could do a similar thing. If I tap the Alt key, it will allow this to fold. I call that auto fold. We'll do that again. Tap the Alt key, I can make this thing do all kinds of weird stuff. See, it tends to want to go on the axis. If I tap the Alt key, it will allow me to go pretty much where I want. This can be a little touchy. And see, it allows it to move in different directions. If the Alt key is untapped, it tends to stay on axis. Okay, so you get the idea. How do we create, let's say, a gable roof triangular shape on this piece? We'll pull it out a little bit more to make it more interesting. Say I want to make a gable here, like this portion to be pitched. So in order to do that, I have to create an edge here. I'm going to find a midpoint with the line tool, come across, and pick the other side. So now I have two different faces and I have a line. So I'm going to pre-select that line. That's my fold point. Use the move tool, grab that edge, and go straight up on the blue axis. If you have a hard time with this, tap the up arrow key and it'll keep you on the blue axis. So now I have a gable. Pretty simple. Let's say I want to make a hip. I want to create a fold in here again, much like a typical hip roof you might make. This face needs to fold, so I need an edge. So I'm going to draw that edge in there. And I want to draw just by hand. I want to draw that hip. This is one way to do a hip. I'll show you another here shortly. So I'm going to pick the point where that intersect that ridge, another line. So what essentially I've done is I've created a new face directly under this face. I'll erase these faces, and I'm going to pick right on that intersection. I'll erase all of them at the same time. Hip, pretty simple. Now I can do that in another way by using the move tool as well. So remember, that was the line tool. I can do that with the move tool. So again, don't pre-select anything. If you're pre-selecting a point, that's going to do some weird stuff to you. So picking a point here with move, you can see I'm creating all kinds of folds that I probably don't want. I mean, maybe I do for some other purpose, but here I don't want to do that. So I could end up with something like that. I'm going to back up. So I want to create a fold just like I did on that side here. I'm going to do the same thing. So I put a line, get two faces. Now using the move tool, I can create a similar hip. Again, don't pre-select, just pick that point and slide it here along the ridge. It's also on the green axis. Boom, I have a hip. Now I'll probably want to tip that one up a little bit, more or less the same as the other one. Okay. I'm going to remove all this stuff. And you can see what's happening is all these faces are going away. I'm just swiping across with the move tool. Now, let's draw another. I'm going to use the rectangle tool here instead of the line tool just for quickness. I have this face. Say I want that face to be over here. I can move that face independent of the main face with the move tool. So I can move that up or down or left or right, whatever I'd like to do. I can also move it out here in space somewhere, but this gets a little funky because you're not really sure where that is. So I'm going to put that back. Okay. Pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to draw another rectangle on this side. And again, I could do that with the line tool. Let's say I want that line to line up with that line. I mean, your first inclination is probably to try to move this up and reference that. It's a little harder on a corner. So the way I would do this is use a tape measure and create some guidelines here as a reference. So now I've cut that line around the corner. Again, that's pre-selected, so I can move that up and just catch that line. Erase the guidelines, and we have it. I'd like to move this more or less in the middle. That's pretty good. Now if I push-pull this out, similar to I did with this, just the face, if I get this kind of straight on, using the window select, left to right, I've now picked that entire entity. Maybe you have to be a little careful because there might be something on the other side that you might select as well. So flip it around, make sure there's nothing over here. In this case, there isn't. Good. I can move this entire entity back and forth on this face, up and down, left and right. Now I could move it out on the red axis, but you can see it gets a little weird. It doesn't really work for you. So in other words, you can move an entire entity if you like. Simple. The other use of the move tool, which is rather interesting, you're not going to get this with a push-pull, so I can create three-dimensional geometry out of this rectangle by using a move tool. I'm just going to make this a little bigger. Okay. Now, easy way to, I want to create another rectangle inside this one, approximately the same proportion. Well, exactly the same proportion. I can use the offset tool here by simply picking the base, offsetting this, let's say to there. And now you can see we have the same proportion, we have several faces. Now I can move this rectangle face out using the move tool. And you can see it's not really doing much of anything. I mean, it's moving, it's copying it more or less. But it just puts it right on the same face. I'd like this face to be out here. Now this is fun. I move this face and I'm on the green axis, so I'm going to tap the left arrow key. And what happens is I get a fold. I now get a, what is this? A truncated pyramid, I guess. I can pull that out. Inversely, I can push it in. Okay. So let's say I want to reshape this thing a little bit. I can now, if I'd like, move one of these parts and reshape this geometry, which, might be a little more interesting architecturally. Do the same with the bottom if I like. Put it wherever I like. The whole point of this is using the move tool to reconstruct geometry or modify it, change it so it's something more than what you might imagine it to be originally. Okay. Essentially, you start triangulating things, removing faces by moving points. It's pretty simple. Again, if I'd like, I can move this entire geometry by window selecting. I'll do that again. Window select. Don't use the crossing, use the window. I can move this around. So you could do this with a door or a window or something of that sort that you'd like to be in a different place. That's about it. I'll quickly do one other item, which is, very basic use of this. So here I have two lines. And let's say I'd like to come up to here. Now your temptation would be to draw new lines. The other way to do this is to pick that point up. That's pre-selected over there. Pick that point and I can move it up to whatever point I like. Okay, so now I've created a tilted face as so. So don't be afraid to use the move tool to create new shapes. It actually makes SketchUp a little more interesting and allows you the opportunity to experiment very quickly. That's about it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching.